Well, I'm sure you guys have been following the story in the news, the Connecticut incident, and I guess people, want to politicize this, which, I'm not going to go off into that. Basically, what this conversation is about is, and I'm sure some of you are being asked because the debate is being had, and I'm sure that this is the debate that's going to be used, or the argument that's going to be used to chip away at Second Amendment rights is, why is it necessary to own so-called assault weapons, weapons like AR-15s? I'm sure maybe you're being asked that. I'm certainly, being asked that maybe if you have, liberal family or friends asking. I know my friends, I'm catching hell from my friends for the fact that I'm not in support of any type of limitations. I'm very open about the fact that I believe that anything that the military is allowed to own, we should be allowed to own. If we can walk into whatever dealer and prove that we're not a nut, we're not a lunatic, you can positively identify who you are, you should be able to own whatever you want. You should be able to buy whatever. We should have access to the same things the military has access to. And, you, like myself, if you believe the same thing, like myself or something similar, you're going to get, arguments like, you're a kook or a nut or something for thinking like that, because the first thing they're going to throw in your face is posse comitatus. Which, I'm sure you guys are aware, posse comitatus is the Posse Comitatus Act prevents Congress, the Senate, or the President from using any branch of our armed services against us. They cannot use the military to enforce U.S. law, even during the course of civil unrest. Supposedly it can't happen. But what people, I think, fail to consider is things that the government is capable of doing outside of the confines of normal U.S. law and procedure. For example, organizations like Blackwater. I'm sure you guys have heard about, you've heard the horror stories about things that have taken place overseas by Blackwater, offenses that were committed. Pull up your search engine, type in Blackwater and Hurricane Katrina. And the people who, use these arguments against you, maybe people that are not in favor of gun rights, that ask these people why basically a paramilitary organization was walking the streets in broad daylight during the course of Hurricane Katrina. It happened. Maybe you don't believe me. Maybe you're listening to this and you're going, okay, yeah, where are your pills, girl? Get your medicine, take your pills. But I'm serious. Pull up your search engine, type it in. You don't have to take my word for it. Also, the Patriot Act. Also the thing to consider and the thing to bring up to these people who want to brand people like myself as a nut or a kook or whatever, a gun loon or whatever. When the Japanese were rounded up for internment and detention during the course of World War II, who have the research who carried that out? Who performed that? That was not performed by city, state, local police entities. That was performed and carried out by the U.S. Army. Don't take my word. Again, look it up. It happened. And then you have things like the Patriot Act that basically gives our government broad, sweeping authority, scary, broad sweeping, authoritarian, Orwellian type, Big Brother type authority. All they have to do is take a term like enemy combatant and slap it on you. And all of a sudden, habeas corpus and all the other, traditional guidelines, rules, things that are in place to protect those who are accused of committing offenses go directly out the window. So there are ways, through things like the Patriot Act, through, entities like Blackwater. It's not, and our government has hired them. The National Department of Homeland Security, the NSA, had this organization pounding the pavement during the course of Katrina, supposedly in the name of keeping order and in the name of, helping these people. But that's not what happened. People were assaulted. People were shot. People were hurt. You just didn't hear much about it, but it did happen. And so I guess what I'm saying is there are ways of our government doing things without doing things. So yeah, on the one hand, you could argue that, okay, well, posse comitatus prevents our government from turning our military against us, from using them against us. But there's no rule in place that says that they cannot use paramilitary organizations like Blackwater if that's what they felt the need to do. And Blackwater, the thing that's so scary about it is it's not a part of our military, and it's not a militia either. So I know some of you were thinking, okay, well, we are allowed to have militias. Militias can be used. But Blackwater is not a militia. It is a paramilitary organization. It's not, I mean, yeah, technically militias are paramilitary organizations as well. But the difference is, Blackwater is they're basically mercenaries. They're entities that anyone or any government can hire to carry out whatever. Benito Mussolini used them, and they were called brown shirts. And he used paramilitary organizations whenever he wanted to do things against the Italian people outside of the norms and the confines of Italian law, because Italian law prevented the military from being used against the Italian people. So the way he bent that rule, or the way that governments will do things without actually doing things, is to operate outside, find ways, little subtle and covert ways to operate outside the confines of normal law. And so Benito Mussolini had them, they were called brown shirts. The Nazis, during Nazi Germany, they had them, they were called black shirts. But it all boils down to the same thing. These paramilitary organizations that don't really operate within the confines of any given law or set of laws, being called in and hired out to do certain things. And they were, walking the streets in broad daylight during the course of Hurricane Katrina. They were armed to the teeth. These are trained killers, basically. I mean, I don't mean to sound extreme or to go there, but that's what they are. That's what they were. And they were armed to the teeth. They were hired, by entities within our government, the Department of Defense, through the Department of Homeland Security, and they were walking the street. And then, back to the Patriot Act. I mean, if you guys haven't read it, I don't blame you. I'm kind of a nerd like that, where I'll just sit and read. It's a big honking document. It's a big, huge. So, if you're not interested in reading it, you have no intention of reading it, I don't blame you. I'm just a nerd that way, so I have read it. And the hair on the back of your neck would stand up if, ask yourself, what is an enemy combatant? Because if you read the Patriot Act, it really is a very generic, broad, sweeping term, and it can be applied to anybody. And once you have this term applied to you, they haul you in, or someone that that you love or whatever, and I'm not being paranoid. I realize that the chances of this happening are small. But it has happened to people, and it is possible, and it has happened before, and there are instances throughout our history where our government has overstepped its bounds. And to me, this is why it's necessary to own weapons like AR-15s. This is why it's necessary to own, for why people should be allowed to own armor-piercing bullets, for why people should be allowed to own whatever. I'm sure you get the question all the time thrown up at you. I know I certainly do. When was the last time you saw a deer wearing a bulletproof vest or wearing body armor? And I realize that for a lot of gun owners, it's about collecting. It's about, they're collectors. For some people, yeah, I mean, especially if you're in a prepping community, or maybe you just grew up, with your family, it's part of your, family thing, hunting. Which if you do, that's great, but that's not what it's about. It's about being able to protect yourself when our government oversteps its bounds, as it has been known to do. And it's scary. The Patriot Act is scary. And as liberal, as a liberal, and as liberals, we're tempted to, this is George Bush, and this was done during the Bush administration, and yeah, that's true. It's true. But bear in mind, liberals who may be listening to this, that liberals went along with this. So this is not something that we can take and sit in Bush's lap, because all of the progressives and liberals, and who should have been screaming at the top of their lungs like sheep, basically went along with this, passed this. There was one voice of dissent. There was one congressman who went against it. There's one, just one, and he was treated as though, as though he was somehow un-American, as though, because I think he understood the danger of taking away people's rights and limiting people's liberties and freedoms in the name of so-called keeping them safe. And that's how, paramilitary organizations, that's how our government would use, a group. You send in a group of guys armed to the teeth in the name of keeping order and in the name of issuing humanitarian aid or whatever. And if you prep, or if you're a prepper like myself, you're going to be very conscious when of stuff like that. You're going to be hypersensitive or extra sensitive to the possibility of stuff like that, because if you prep, one of the things that you consider on a day-to-day basis is, what would happen during the course of a RAW or SHTF situation. How would we handle it? How would our government handle it? How would local and civil authorities handle it? And it's something to consider, and it's really scary to think about in the respective, if you ended up with a really, like, a protracted situation of social unrest due to something like economic collapse. And it can happen. I mean, you may think I'm a kook or a nut, but it can happen. We teetered on the brink of economic collapse in 2008, so it's very possible. And and I know as preppers, we like to joke about zombies and having weapons. We jokingly call our guns and weapons zombie medicine and but that's just what it is. It's a joke. And I know this boy's mother, I guess she was a prepper. She believed that something was coming too. She believed in the possibility of civil unrest, which is why she was passionate about keeping firearms, and the media has attempted to malign her and make her look like a kook, this dead woman who is a victim of her sick child. Is being maligned as, somehow having something wrong with her for believing this. It's ridiculous. But in short, not to get off the beaten path, when people ask you, why is it necessary to own, a semi-automatic weapon, or, a weapon that's capable of firing 30 to 160 to 200 or so rounds every X amount of seconds or whatever, you just let them know, have them do their homework and have them do research, because, we do have points repeatedly throughout history where the government has basically overstepped its bounds, and the Patriot Act gives our government the authority to act with impunity against anyone that they, have branded an enemy combatant. And you don't have to be brown-skinned or a Muslim like myself or born on foreign soil to have this term slapped on you. You don't have to be. It can happen to everyday people, and it has happened. And this is why it's necessary, to own such weapons. This is why AR-15s and that category of weapons and armor-piercing bullets and so on and so forth are necessary, because you never know. And one of the first things that would happen during the course of a RAW situation or SHTF situation, is they know they can't deploy the military, but there's no law against them deploying paramilitary organizations. And these organizations do not act, they basically operate outside of the norms and outside of the confines of normal law. The same rules don't apply to these people. And, if you're branded a threat or an enemy combatant, the same rules and protections under the law won't apply to you. And they can hold you indefinitely. And, there's laws and stuff that prevent them from holding you on U.S. soil indefinitely. Yes, you're right. I know what you're thinking. Well, yeah, they can't, here in the United States, they can't just, if you're accused of something and you're a citizen, they have to give you a trial. But if you're an enemy combatant or you're branded an enemy combatant for whatever reason, that's not true. They can ship you off to some wherever overseas and hold you indefinitely, and they do not have to give you a trial. And they can hold you for as long as they feel like holding you. And if you don't believe me, read the Patriot Act. It's right there. It's right there for anyone to see. So, when your friends, whether they're liberal or, conservative, maybe conservatives who are anti-gun or anti-Second Amendment or have issues with the Second Amendment, and they ask you, why is it necessary to own weapons like this? This is why. This is why. And there's evidence of it. This is not, the gospel according to me. Have them type in Katrina and Blackwater. Ask them to research when Japanese people were rounded up during the course of World War II. Japanese people who were born and raised here had never seen Japanese soil a day in their lives. These were citizens just like us. Who rounded these people up? Who was responsible for running these internment camps and keeping these people in prison? Who did that? It was not local, state, and civil authorities. It was our military. It was the U.S. Army. And you don't have to take my word for it, and neither do they. But if anyone who wants to research that, it's there. So this is why it's necessary to own AR-15s. This is why it's necessary to own, this is why I believe that any weapon that our military owns, we should be allowed to own. You can walk in and prove that you're not a kook, you're not a nut, you can positively identify who you are. I don't think there should be, if you want to buy a tank, I think you should be allowed to. Okay, I know. A lot of you guys are thinking I've lost it, you're scratching your head, so I'm going to end the video with that. I still believe that. That's just what I believe. If you don't believe that or you don't agree with that, I understand, but that's just what I believe. And now you know why. Alright, this is it. This is all. And ta-ta.